and welcome to Notes from the Oracle. I'm Connor, and together with Jack, my co-host from Cabin 6, we're going beyond Half-Blood Hill to take a closer look at the electrifying mythology of Percy Jackson and the Olympians, Book 1, The Lightning Thief.
Chapter 6, I become Supreme Lord of the Bathroom, which absolutely gives Melon Lord vibes.
I like the extra little bit of spice you put on that title read. That was good.
I was really enjoying this one. I mean, how can you not see the word Supreme Lord of the Bathroom and not want to embellish a little?
Rick does such a good job with compelling chapter titles. This was, me having read these before knew where it came from, but the idea of somebody reading this for the first time and being like, what the fuck is this? What's going to happen? Is just so quaint. I love it so much.
It's so much fun, especially because I think there is a certain level of dramatic irony when you do know what's going to happen, that it's like you just exploded some toilets and you're like, I am Supreme Lord of Toilet Water.
I mean, to be fair, though, that's not a wrong conclusion to come to. There is some level of truth to that, but we'll get to that later in the chapter. Before we jump into this, a couple of things. One, this is a longer chapter. There's a lot of stuff here.
Mm-hmm.
It is also, because there's a lot of stuff here, despite the fact that it is a longer chapter, like page count, it's dense. There's a lot of stuff thrown at the reader here. But, and I'd like to get your opinion on this, whereas in some prior chapters, I don't know, I feel like I've bemoaned some of the the exposition was like, it's interesting, but it felt a little ham-fisted, or it just kind of got boring and my eyes were glazing over at certain points. All of this was compelling to me.
Totally
I
agree.
was pretty locked in the entire time.
I 100% am right there with you. And I think, at least from my perspective, it doesn't help that we're coming off of chapter 5, which I think was the most, here's exposition. We gotta get through this. I promise there's something fun after. Chapter 6 feels more like, here's some exposition, but like, there's new characters that come with it. There's new dynamics that come with it. The exposition isn't all just world lore. It's got some like, check out this thing Percy can do. We're just going to drop you a little bit of his powers. We're going to check out the cap. I mean, who doesn't love walking around Camp Half-Blood? I think that's part of what makes it better. To me, is we get to see so much more of the camp too.
Yes. No, I wholeheartedly agree. It is nice that they're obviously expanding on the world, like you said, but there's more interpersonal kind of relations that are built here. And we love seeing some feats, some Percy feats or demigod feats for the first time as well. That's always fun. And this is one of those chapters that you and I, on our own time, have talked about the Percy Jackson show, and it is its own product. And maybe down the line, we'll do a watch through of it or something. But one thing that, even though we both enjoyed the show, we struggled with was there wasn't enough time spent in Camp Half-Blood, getting to know its grounds, getting to know the people on the grounds. And this is a perfect example of a chapter that I wish, if the show had 1 or 2 more episodes, they just spent more time doing stuff like this.
100% there with you, because I think where you're really starting to miss on the atmosphere is not even just like the other campers, which I don't think you get quite enough of in the show, but also just the way that the camp feels itself alive to a certain degree. And I do think that the descriptions in the book are never quite matched. It just doesn't feel like you get that vibrancy. They don't show you Ares' cabin being painted bright red, just slapped on, disorganized chaos. The way that the Artemis cabin is supposed to like glow when the sun sets, that sort of thing. Like you just you don't get that.
Yes. A lot of the character, I feel like, in these live action adaptations get kind of washed away in place of just, oh, it's a summer camp. Which it is, of course. Like, hitting home on those summer camp vibes is, I would say, important, if not integral, to the idea of Camp Half-Blood. But there's so much more sauce that I feel like has been discarded in some of these adaptations. So this is all to say, not to bash the live action stuff, except for the movie sucks. This chapter was just so fun and refreshing. and once again hammered home, like, oh yeah, this is why I loved this series growing up, because all of this, it's so evocative of this interesting kind of mystical and just filled to the brim with character place. So it was really nice to dive back into it. And with that, I think let's start getting into some of the meat and potatoes of this chapter. So, first things first, Percy is being a bit derogatory towards Chiron. He is referring to him as a horse, and then said, I'd done some pooper scooper patrol in the Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade, and I'm sorry. I did not trust Chiron's back end the way I trusted his front, which is so fucked up on so many levels.
Bit of a fun fact, just as I was doing notes for other things, I did come across, apparently in Percy Jackson lore, the reason that Chiron uses the wheelchair is because the way he dies in actual mythology is he's hit with a poison arrow in the leg, and apparently it still causes him pain to this day. And so that's why he occasionally uses the wheelchair.
Very interesting.
Yeah. They mentioned that we passed the volleyball pit simply because it comes up later. It feels like the type of detail that is so unnecessary, but Rick is like, later when Percy says, but I've already seen the volleyball pit. I got to set up for it. I appreciate that.
It's the mystery writer in him. That's Chekhov's volleyball pit.
It so is. I was going to say, I also like that the campers are pointing at him and going, that's him as he's holding the Minotaur horn. Solely because after chapter 5, I completely forgot that he was just holding the Minotaur horn for that entire conversation. It's so not
he has
relevant.
been holding a trophy this entire time.
And like presumably it's big. Like in the show, it's not small either. So
yeah, no, I'm imagining it like it is the size of like a war horn, something where if you were to blow in the end of it, it would go.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's like infant sized, which is not
it is
huge,
that's
but it's
a great
not
way to
small
put it.
either.
Infant sized. I like that.
I mean, the way he cradles it, I gotta imagine it's not dissimilar. But this is when we start to get really into the vivid descriptions of Camp Half-Blood. Something about the descriptions, even just of like a whole bunch of people in orange Camp Half-Blood t-shirts, gives me the chills. It makes me so happy. I just want it.
Mm-hmm.
I think it does play off of my personal summer camp experience, one that I know you can 100% empathize with as you were there as well. The bright red t-shirts from our summer camp whenever we went on field trips. Like,
that's right.
It strikes something. There is something so quintessential summer camp about everybody has to wear the same shirt.
Oh my God. And Connor, it's so interesting that you mentioned that, because that thought did not cross my mind. And I have not thought about those bright red t-shirts in easily like 15 years.
Bright red shirts with yellow font.
My synapses that were covered in dust just exploded to life like an old diesel engine. Oh my God. Heading to Turtle Cove with the bright red t-shirts.
Mm-hmm.
Woo! Classic.
But like, another thing that I really feel is cool about Camp Half-Blood compared to even something like that, we were too young to really like have styles yet, but all of the demigods have such a distinct style when we are inevitably...
They've got their own flair.
I like that everyone is putting their spin on it, and I always felt like that was a cool part of the lore, is if you could imagine yourself as a demigod, you would know how you would style the orange shirt in your way, right? In the way of your godly parentage and all that. It's just fun. I love that.
It does add a level of kind of individualism. And again, I keep using the term character, and I'm going to stop. But like, it just adds another level of character to the camp. As you were talking, it just made me think about like D&D demigods and even all of the players without being prompted. It was just second nature. All had their different styles for wearing the Camp Half-Blood t-shirt, right? And how they would accessorize or accentuate them or show them off or not show them off. It was just, it's such a fun level of putting a very specific stamp of, oh yeah, this is very clearly, it is Camp Half-Blood. This is the Greek god camp, in a way that once we get further down the line, and maybe I'm misremembering, but I feel like you don't see that as much with like Camp Jupiter.
Yeah, Camp Jupiter is militaristic, right? There's a standard for how you...
It's like a uniform.
Yes. Exactly. That's
Yeah.
a great way to put it. It's a uniform, whereas here it's just the camp t-shirt, man.
Yeah.
You can wear whatever you want with it, but you got to wear the t-shirt. Whereas there, they're all wearing armor. You don't even really see the Camp Jupiter t-shirts because they're always wearing armor and on duty. But
Now, something that I do like in this section, aside from everything we've already mentioned, is just another one of Rick's little lines that just it caught me off guard. It made me like audibly laugh, which was, I wasn't normally shy, but the way all these other kids were staring at me made me uncomfortable. I felt like they were expecting me to do a flip or something, which is just such, again, I never would think like, oh yeah, that is the kind of vibe that those kids are giving off. But that single line alone totally contextualizes the energy of the scene, where it's like, yep, I know exactly what that means. There's a level of like wonder and curiosity with this, Percy being the new kid that did something incredible. So like, yeah, it'd be like if you were watching like Spider-Man walk down the street. You would
yeah,
expect him to do a flip. Hey, Spider Guy, do a flip. Like it's
yeah,
exactly that.
I love everything about this chapter. Even just, again, there's the Rickisms, the mystery writerisms.
Mm-hmm.
What's up there? I asked Chiron. Always with the right questions, Percy. We're not even going to meet the Oracle for like 3 chapters. I think that's chapter 9 stuff. And he's
Mm-hmm.
just like tossing it in there. You should be suspicious of this window and this upstairs area from
Yeah.
right now. It's so good. It's so
Mm-hmm.
fun.
Yeah. The levels of mystique that are being thrown into camp at just a rapid pace. I feel like everything that we learn or everything we see just adds another kind of layer to it. This also has Chiron being once again back on his bullshit, which I don't get. Percy says, "What's up there?" Chiron says, "Just the attic. Somebody lives there?" And then Chiron, this fucking prick, says, "No, not a single living thing." I'm tired of the technically true stuff. I'm tired of it. Percy's here. Tell him what's up there.
I wrote exactly what I said. I mean, technically true, but come on.
There's no reason. All the theatrics, they can go away now, Chiron. They can go away. At this point, it is abundantly clear. There's no other explanation that I can think of. There's no other, oh, well, maybe if he gets this information too soon, then he'll really start to like be a beacon to the monsters or whatever. He is here in Camp Half-Blood. He's safe. He has seen things. There's no going back. The genie's out of the bottle. Chiron is only doing this because he gets a fucking kick from it. Genuinely.
Well, especially because he's about to go hand Percy off to Annabeth to continue showing him around camp. And
Yes,
Annabeth
who would tell him what it was.
desperately wants a quest and no doubt exactly would tell Percy what it is. Why? What is the point, Chiron? There
And
isn't one.
and I know, like, okay, zooming out, not nitpicking. I know they did this because Rick was like, this will make it interesting. And it is interesting. Like, ooh, what is that? But from an actual character perspective, Chiron is just being a dickhead. Of course it's compelling, but it doesn't need to be compelling for Percy. The kid's gone through enough. Stop with the riddles.
And speaking of riddles, by the way, everything he says, or rather doesn't say, about Grover's past mistakes, I'm afraid that was Grover's second chance.
Yeah.
Nothing else. If you want Grover to have to tell him, you can just say, that's something you should ask Grover about privately.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to say, this was his second chance. Mysterious backstory.
Your friend is fucked.
Yeah.
But before we get to that, because there's still a little bit of stuff in between that I want to cover. Something else, we walk by the strawberry fields, which it adds so much to the vibe of Camp Half-Blood, but we never really see it in the live action stuff. I love the strawberry fields. I think they're so cool. But I thought what was funny was Chiron's explaining, oh, yeah, we export these to New York and Mount Olympus. But he says it pays our expenses, which is such a funny concept that this magical camp ordained by not just a god, the gods, multiple of them, somehow has expenses that require money to pay for properly, which makes me think like, do they have to pay utilities? Does the state of New York hold supremacy over godly lands? Are the gods and their children not exempt from taxes?
That's a good question. I mean, I guess they have to probably pay for things like gas on occasion.
Should they, though? Should they? I feel like
Oh.
with the gods as sponsors, maybe they can just have that taken care of. The only thought that comes to mind is like, oh, maybe not. I understand for Mount Olympus, maybe they get paid in like drachma, right? And then it's like, oh, so they can pay for like iris messages or the godly magical world currency. Like there's an
Yeah.
economy at play there. And I get that. But it is specifically, I love that they included that New York restaurants get them. So there are real businesses. There's a transaction happening between Camp Half-Blood and actual places of business, restaurants, that are giving, I'm assuming, legal tender United States currency. What are they using it for? It's just there's something really funny about like, yeah, they probably just have like a satyr go into town and they're like, yep, here's 5 crates of strawberries. Give us however much money. And it's just they have a stockpile of golden drachma and $20 bills.
See, and that's what made this very funny to me is I was totally imagining some random satyr, which is a nature spirit, being forced to go all the way into New York City, which is not a place where a nature spirit should be, walking up to some restaurant and being like, "Do you know where these strawberries came from? These were touched by a god."
And then we get to hear more about why they have strawberries. So Mr. D, not allowed to make wine grapes, so they grow strawberries. And I just like that, it's one of the chores or activities that the campers have is just go out and pick strawberries. And there's a satyr playing his pipe, and it's controlling a bunch of bugs, like refugees fleeing a fire, very specifically stated, like refugees fleeing a fire. And it does raise an interesting question. Like we're seeing satyrs do this interesting stuff. And Percy even thinks like, can Grover do that? Like, does he have magic? And at this point, I don't remember if Grover can do any cool stuff like that. I think he might just be able to eat metal, which is
Yeah.
impressive.
Grover's book 1 magic is very sad. It is funny though that you bring this up because this reminds me very distinctly of a scene in Chalice of the Gods, which is in the like new Percy Jackson college letter trilogy is what I'll call it. I'll call it the college letter trilogy, which is still coming out right now because he then plays music to distract a bunch of angry snakes that serve a god that they're talking with. But he actually does eventually do magic like this. That's it.
Gotcha. And he doesn't have time to learn magic right now because he's in big trouble, like we were talking
He is
about
in big
earlier.
trouble. And actually,
mhm.
if you don't mind my interjecting, I
Please
thought
interject.
you might be interested in knowing the history of the Council of Cloven Elders. I dug and dug and dug, Jack. This is a verified Rick original. There is in-universe lore. They honestly don't do a whole lot. They basically are in 2 books. And that's it. I was actually rather disappointed to find that this wasn't based on like a real thing anywhere. There's no historical precedent for a council, or not historical, but like mythological precedent for a council of satyrs or even other nature spirits. So I found that disappointing. But also, it means that Rick came up with something cool.
Yeah, that is neat. Now, I appreciate Percy not only asking, hey, Grover's in trouble, but it won't be too much trouble, right? Like he's clearly concerned. And he does vouch. He says, Grover, he was a good protector. I'll vouch for the guy. And Chiron is, again, speaking a little bit in riddles, but does lay out that Grover is a little fucked. He lays out what some of the goals, the rules of being a protector are, and that Grover very specifically has set his goal way above what he's probably capable of, way above what most satyrs, if not all satyrs, are probably capable of. Now, we don't learn what that is in this chapter, but again, we're seeing like, all right, this kind of dorky, anxiety ridden best friend character actually has some pretty profound prospects. And we don't know what it is. It's again, it's shrouded in a bit of mystery right now. But I don't necessarily like that. I'm on Percy's side. That doesn't happen a whole lot. I'll put it this way. I'm on Percy's side. Chiron says The goal is that he has to demonstrate courage by succeeding as a keeper and finding a new camper and bringing them safely to Half-Blood Hill. And Percy says he did that, which is entirely true. And Chiron also says, I might agree with you. The Council of Cloven Elders, they might not see this as a success. He lays out that Grover lost you in New York. And then there's the unfortunate fate of your mother. And then, the fact that Grover was unconscious and Percy actually had to drag him over the property line. However, for parts 1 and 2, for losing Percy in New York and Percy's mom, heavy air quotes, dying, 1, that was Percy's fault, and he readily admits this. That has nothing to do with Grover. And 2, I'm sorry, that's not his job. Percy's mom is not who he's supposed to be protecting at all.
And above all of that, what awful luck.
Yeah.
This guy has had 2 assignments and he's gotten 2 big 3 kids in a row.
Dude, his back is tired.
And I understand that in the past, his first time, technically his charge was Thalia. He got 2 other demigods across the line safely. Luke and Annabeth, both totally alive.
And for what it's worth, Thalia's still there.
I might agree, but that's not for me to decide.
Yeah, it's for this stupid council to decide. I don't like them. I'm glad they don't show up a whole lot. They sound like assholes.
Yeah, they basically only show up 2 other times. They're going to show up to give Grover his searcher's license and then be like, what? You didn't actually see what you saw? And Grover's going to be like, but I did. I was in the labyrinth. Pan was there. And then they're going to show up one more time to be like, we're not going to fight the Titans in this big world-ending battle that could kill a whole bunch of people. And Grover is like, guys, really? The end of the world's happening and you're not going to do anything? They inevitably join, and Mr. Grumpy Pants actually dies in the fight. Whoops, spoilers.
Damn.
You can look forward to that.
I loved Mr. Grumpy Pants, probably my favorite character, so I'm disappointed to hear that he doesn't stick around to the very end.
Oh, well, you get 5 books of him, although
awesome.
He's only in 3 scenes.
Great.
I didn't remember
First Argus.
He's a very
First Argus, now Mr. Grumpy Pants. All my favorites. They're the keys. They're integral and they're barely in these stories.
The best bench warmers.
They are the best bench warmers. But yes, so we learned this was Grover's second chance. The first chance he had was 5 years ago. I like that Chiron also is like, and he's so small. He's so small for his age. He's such a little guy. Percy says, well, wait, how old is he? Because for Percy, if they are peers, Grover seems older. He has little facial hair. It's like, oh, he's 28. And Percy is reasonably concerned by that. And that's when we get the, oh no, satyrs, they mature half as fast as humans. So he's still the equivalent of a 14-year-old. So he's still older than Percy. But I love how it's, Grover has been the equivalent of a middle school student for the past 6 years. And Percy just says, that's horrible.
I think this is one of those instances where Rick's personal biases slip into Percy. As a teacher, he worked with middle schoolers. He's like, oh, what a nightmare.
Well, dude, speaking as a former middle schooler, it did suck.
That's
Anybody
true.
that says, oh man, middle school was the best, they're either lying, psychos, or they were stupid and didn't have enough introspection to realize everything sucked. Yeah.
They peaked real early.
If you peaked in middle school, I am so sorry to hear that. Genuinely. That is a fate worse than death. That is a level of tragedy usually reserved for the Greek.
Speaking of Greek tragedy, I did find it very funny that Percy goes, I had the beginnings of an idea. And all I could think was, you and every other Greek hero. Did some important person to me die? Time to go get him.
They're there. And hey, he wouldn't be the first one to go and grab somebody.
Nope. And, as always, Rick is setting up for the future. We're establishing super early on, before we actually know the rest of what Percy's quest will mean, before he agrees to any of it, before we even know what's been taken and why Percy will go on a quest, we already know his actual motivation, and I think that's cool. I think that's well written, and I think it gives him something as a character to strive for outside of just the goal, which gives us that additional layer of investment.
Oh yeah, no, that was incredibly well done. Again, I would say is not incredibly well done, or maybe well done the first time you're reading, but now you read it back and you're like, Chiron's just a dickhead. We get more of Chiron giving non-answers or ignoring Percy for no reason.
Oh,
He
that
says,
never stops.
yeah, there's an underworld. Yeah, spirits go after death, but for now, until we know more, I would urge you to put that out of your mind, which is fair. And then Percy asks a very reasonable question. What do you mean until we know more? And Chiron doesn't even say, I said put it out of your mind or like put his foot down. He just says, come, Percy, let's see the woods. You're not being whimsical. You're not being quirky. You're being an ass. All right? You're being an ass. Cut it out. And then he does it again, like right after. We go and we check out the huge forest and with trees super tall and super thick. Clearly, it seems like they haven't been touched for hundreds of years. And Chiron said, the woods are stocked. If you care to try your luck, but go armed. And Percy, again, he's actually on top of things, asks very good clarifying questions.
Yes.
Stocked with what? Armed with what? And then Chiron just says, you'll see.
Well,
And then
what gets me
as
is
the
he
little...
goes, do you have your own sword and shield?
Yes!
Like,
he might as well just be flipping Percy off this entire time, be like, yeah, newbie. Oh, what? You don't? You don't have a sword and shield? You know it's in the forest? Oh, that's right. Oh, you don't know that because you have no idea what's going on. If only somebody here could give you information.
well, especially because he's like, armed? Why would I need to be armed? Chiron, just point over there and see those trees. Those trees are stocked with monsters. Don't go in
Yes.
there or you might get eaten. There you go.
Correct.
That's what
And
you needed to tell him.
I can't help but feel like that's incredibly irresponsible of Chiron, too, because he knows Percy. It's not like this is a new kid that he's meeting. He knows that Percy is very impulsive and stubborn. And as he found, will go out and like seek his own answers if they aren't given to him. Just tell him, hey, Percy, you know the thing that killed your mom? There's like more of those basically in the woods. So don't go there. You'll probably die if you're not prepared.
And let's leave out the part that we put them in there for fun.
Which we're going to get into some of the safety issues with Camp Half-Blood in a little bit. And by a little bit, I actually just scrolled down in my PDF. Actually, right now.
Yep.
So they're walking, they're saying, oh yeah, there's an armory, there's the archery range, and the canoeing lake, and the stables, which Chiron did not seem to like very much, and the javelin range, and the sing-along amphitheater, and the arena, where people just have sword and spear fights. And Chiron says, oh, for cabin challenges. And then he just very nonchalantly says, not lethal, usually. Oh yes, and there's the mess hall, which... Again, very funny. That is hilarious. However, Chiron, what the fuck is wrong with you? What is wrong with you and you fucking psychos here?
I just love that he does it again. Literally his next line. What do you do when it rains? We still have to eat, don't we? You could just say, oh, it doesn't rain here. Instead,
Yeah.
Person is just left permanently afraid that one day it will rain when he's trying to eat his food, and he'll just have to eat wet.
Maybe it's like Chiron has just been so isolated in Camp Half-Blood that he forgets, like, what
Being normal is.
He's such an expert, right? He's such an expert that he doesn't understand what the average person doesn't know. He's like one of those professors that is amazing in their field. They're at like the bleeding edge of research, and you see them on a syllabus, and it's like, oh, I've got Professor blah, blah, blah. They're going to be so good for networking. I'm going to learn so much from them, but they are absolute dog water at explaining things.
Terrible.
They're in the stratosphere while you're still like sitting on the ground waiting to figure out what's happening.
Yeah.
That's kind of the vibes that I'm getting. But then I think Chiron had been living in the real, I'm using air quotes, the real world with Percy for the last like 6 months or year or whatever, right? So I feel like there had to have been some level of recalibration with like, oh yes, this is normal for Percy, this is not normal for Percy, or just a base level conventional wisdom. But maybe that's asking too much, because you did mention that Chiron kind of sucked when it came to training heroes. Maybe I have been giving this guy way too much credit all these years, and I am now starting to see him in a very new and very different light.
Honestly, one that feels more accurate. It started as a joke. Why is he doing that? Oh, haha, chapter 1.
Yes,
All right, he did it again.
it's
All right, he
sustained.
did it again.
He just doesn't let up. And every time I'm like, all right, well, I guess there's an excuse for that. Or there's an excuse for that. There are no excuses that I can think of in this chapter. None. Again, outside of the narrative of like, ooh, isn't this mysterious and interesting? But for a character, it's just wild. I almost feel like this would have been like, this could all stay exactly the same if it was literally like anybody else showing Percy around. Like, I don't know that Annabeth would necessarily speak in riddles, but I could see her fucking with Percy and being like, oh, this idiot. He'll learn eventually, whatever. But, like, I'm going to have some fun with him right now. Or, like, Luke. I could even see Luke, he's like a playful guy. He's a bit of a trickster. If he, in this kind of big brother mentality, is just like, yeah, hey, nothing living up there. Oh,
Literally the exact line that
they'll
I was like,
have.
that feels like a Luke line. He totally could
Mhm.
have said that.
Yes. Yes, and I understand why it wasn't Luke, because it'd be a little bizarre to have him just like pop out of nowhere right now. I think it is good where he is introduced, but again, it's just maybe I have had this false image of Chiron in my head, and it's like, nope, he's just always been like this.
Doug, you're imagining Pierce Brosnan.
I am. I am
This is not that
unfortunately.
man.
Unfortunately, my mind palace of Percy Jackson has been tainted by the live action movie.
You're imagining a handsome, trustworthy man who saved
Mhm.
lives.
Stalwart in his actions and words. Yep.
Exactly. And in fact, it's actually not that at all.
Just a weird, scatterbrained psycho trickster. I also don't understand how, as a child, again, I reread these books several times growing up. It wasn't like I read it once and really enjoyed it. And I never picked up on this. Never.
Nah, because
It
you're
just never
focused
crossed
on
my
other things. At least for me, I feel like that's probably because it's like, Chiron's talking again. I'm sure that's not relevant.
mind.
What's he gonna tell me what to do? This is Percy we're talking about. We're about to do the exact opposite. I do not need to pay attention.
Yeah, that's fair. But yes, we've got back to back to back Chiron being a weird, tricky little bastard man. And we're going to brush all that off. Now we're starting to get to some of that juice. We're starting to get to some of the sauce. And we get to the cabins. We see they're arranged in a big U shape. There's 12 of these cabins nestled in the woods by the lake, with 2 at the base and then 5 in a row on either side. And the way that they're all described is just so fun. They're so fun, Connor.
Oh, it's
Do you want to
perfect.
go through and kind of break down what's described here?
I'm gonna preface by saying I think that where these descriptions really succeed is that at no point until you get to Zeus and Hera's cabins are we ever told whose are whose. And you just know.
Yeah,
Number 9 with the smokestacks like a tiny factory. You don't have to. You just that's Hephaestus.
that's
Got it.
Hermes.
Get it.
Oh, right, yeah.
Yeah. I forgot about Hermes' passion side
Yeah,
project.
that's right. Child labor.
Industrialization.
Yes,
But
no,
number 4,
yes.
Demeter's cabin, you've got the tomato vines on the walls, the roof made out of real grass. It's got that earthy feeling. It's evocative. It's amazing. And then Apollo, extra as ever, his cabin 7, seems to be made of solid gold, which gleams in the sunlight. And I love the juxtaposition of these very intricate cabins that are described having like Greek columns, and the fields with the commons area, which has like statues and fountains, and then just like flower beds and a basketball hoop. And it's everything I want it to be out of a modern fantasy story, where they're not shying away from it being modern. These are kids. They
Mhm.
would enjoy playing basketball. It's Interesting that Percy chooses to describe Zeus and Hera's cabins like his and hers mausoleums,
Uh-huh.
because it seems like that is basically what they are.
Hmm.
If you're a demigod that walks in those, you're screwed.
Oh yeah. No, it's
You
it's a
better get out.
phenomenal description. Phenomenal description. But Connor, you glossed over something.
Which one?
You glossed over, well, it wasn't a cabin, but there's this little, it's talking about in the center of the field. There's this huge stone-lined fire pit.
That's true. And the girl about 9 tending the flames, I
Hmm.
assume she's a child of Hestia. Hestia doesn't have a cabin yet, so I was trying to see if I could find anything about children of Hestia to see if I could get a name for this person, because I couldn't. And I think that might be because Hestia is not that prevalent. She's another virgin goddess. She does have people, though, eventually that are her children, but they're like born from fire, similar to the way Athena's children are born from her mind. So I don't know. If this is a person, I don't have a name for them.
Now, Connor, I wasn't sure if you were fucking with me at first. It sounds like you're not. Connor, that is Hestia.
It is? I missed
Yes.
that?
Yes. I'm like 99% sure that that is just straight up Hestia.
Am I crazy? I swear it's not anywhere in this book.
I am positive that that is Hestia. Because when she appears, I know she doesn't really like pop up until the last Olympian, but she is described as, I think, an 8 or 9 year old girl in the last Olympian with the same kind of, mousy brown hair, and she's always there tending the hearth. And she
I hope
has
that's the case.
some. The reason I even remember all this is because, again, I had these hamsters that were named after Hestia because for some reason I just thought she was so cool. And it was because she has some sort of quote that's along the lines of like, when everything falls and every other god has gone off to war, I am the only one that remains. I am home. Because she is the last Olympian. Spoiler alert.
Jack, I went, I looked it up, and you are 100% correct.
I'm basking. Can you feel it?
You should be. This is Hestia. Percy is ignorant to who she actually is, and
Like
apparently it
you.
is mentioned at the very end of the book. I completely forgot. I read that and I was like, "Oh, that matches the description of Hestia. I wonder if that's like one of her kids." Completely lost on me.
Oh, that's phenomenal. You said,
That was
wow,
completely lost.
the resemblance is uncanny. But Hestia
I
doesn't have
did.
any kids.
My brain immediately was like, "Oh, virgin goddess. She doesn't have any kids. Maybe that is Hestia. That's kind of weird. Let me look it up. Oh, she has kids born of flames. That's cool. That's probably one of those."
Oh, that is phenomenal. In that case, I'm so glad I cut you off and went back to
Nope.
that.
I was literally about to say, I'm so glad you pointed that out, because although very funny that I did exactly what Percy did, it was just like, "Oh, that's odd.
Yes.
Moving on."
Uh-huh. Oh, that's phenomenal. All right, sorry. After that
No,
brief
all
aside,
good.
you were going on to the Hera and Zeus cabins. Yep, the his,
Yes.
her mausoleums.
So yeah, the mausoleum, little details. Obviously, you've got the lightning bolts that streak across Zeus's one. And I actually do really like the description of the doors shimmering like holograms. And
Yeah, with
then
the lightning
Hera's,
streaking across them.
yeah, I was saying, and then Hera's just has like very Hera things,
Hmm.
pomegranates, flowers, peacocks. And then the last thing, at least for me on this page, that I was like, "You tell him, Percy," is Percy goes, "Okay, so each cabin had a different god, like a mascot."
Hmm.
Don't let the gods hear you say that, man.
Yeah, well, you
They
know what?
would be so mad.
Based on the precedent that's been set in this book, he also shouldn't, be just saying Zeus and Hera. Because, names
That's
have power
true.
until they don't.
And yet Chiron did not correct him.
Yeah. He
Not
actually
this time.
specifically says, correct.
Good job, Percy.
Good job. You got it.
But there are 12 cabins for the 12
Mhm.
Olympians.
Yet some of the cabins are empty. Ooh, I wonder why
Mhm.
that is.
I love the description of the Poseidon cabin and the way
Mhm.
Percy is called to it. This is a scene that I think they did really well in the show in particular, when you start to get some of like the auditory motifs of these things. Really well done. I think it
Yep.
really evokes that similar feeling. And actually, I think for the show, because you don't get nearly as much of like the actual cabin Montauk experience and nostalgia, I think having that extra moment to bring it through this was good for the show. But here, it's just so subtle. Like it
Mhm.
calls to him, and then Chiron's like, "Come on now." Like, dude,
Yeah.
you think he's big three. If the building is calling to him, use your brain. There's gonna be so many things in this that I'm like, have you not figured it out yet? Have you not figured it out yet?
Yeah. To give some benefit of the doubt to Chiron, although again, everything he's done thus far has not deserved benefit of the doubt. But the idea of there's like the odds of him being big three is so infinitesimally small,
That is
right?
true. That
Where
is
it's like, all
specifically
right,
banned.
maybe Percy just thinks it's cool. Out of all the cabins, the way that it's explained, it seems the most homey. But because there's nobody there, this is what really stuck out to me was Percy looking into this cabin and saying the place felt so sad and lonely. I was glad when Chiron put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Come along, Percy."
I actually interpreted this maybe slightly differently than you. The
Mhm.
way that Percy was feeling sad and lonely there, especially with the evoking feelings of Montauk, to me, that was him experiencing the grief. Montauk reminds him of his mother. This cabin is reminding him of the parent he doesn't have.
Mhm.
And in a weird way, I think you could write it off as symbolism of the absent parent not being able to fulfill for the parent that did everything and has passed away.
Yes. I 100% made the connection to both of the parents being gone and Montauk invoking a concept of both of them. But I also just like just the narrative idea of we know that Percy is going to end up in this cabin, and it's
Mhm.
very sad, for lack of a better word, but very sad that his first impression of what will have to become his new home is that he's glad to be taken away from it. He's like, this is
Yeah.
very somber here. So, good thing I don't have to stay here any longer. But he
Yep.
is going to be forced there. And again, I don't even necessarily know if they call back to that feeling of just empty loneliness. This is a place that has been untouched. It is clearly just here for ceremony, for sake of symmetry, architecture, whatever. But I really do like the concept that even though Percy doesn't know it yet, this sad and lonely place is going to have to become his home, and he'll make it his home.
There's also, of course, the juxtaposition of the negative feelings that it evokes compared to jumping to the Ares cabin after.
Yes.
Just like, again, because you're given that here is a place that almost feels like it should feel so at home for Percy. And then it's like, well, at least you're not over here in this shit show. Bright
And
red, nasty paint job, barbed wire,
this
and a
is
boar's
where
head.
this is where we get to a cabin where I can't help but think there's got to be some of these demigods that show up that are unclaimed where they look at them and they're like, we know where you're going. You ain't got to be claimed. You are enough of a violent, angry person that, yeah, you're probably Aries. I would bet my
Yep.
life on it.
Are you built like a truck and wearing camo pants? Yeah, you belong in that
Yep.
one.
Are you built like a skinhead? Yes. Go to
Yeah.
Aries' cabin. Honestly, even if you aren't Aries' child, you probably should just stay in that cabin anyway.
If you put one of those kids in Hermes' cabin and one of the Hermes kids tries to like steal something from him, you don't want to do
All of
that.
their
That poor
fingers
Hermes kid is
broken.
gonna, yes, literally just get their face smashed in, is what I was gonna
Yep.
say.
Yeah. They're going to be strung up on the flagpole by their underwear. It's not going to end well.
It's gonna happen in minutes. So let's just avoid it. Just put them where they
That's right.
belong.
And you know who would help probably hoist that person up on their underwear onto the flagpole? This new
Fancy.
Nancy Boba Fett character wearing her triple XL Camp Applin t-shirt under a camo jacket.
Nancy
Who is
Boba Fett
this?
evolved into
I
Clarice
was going to
LaRue.
say Clarisse LaRue, the new Nancy Boba Fett and the absolute bane of Percy's existence here at Camp Half-Blood for some time.
They will make a little bit of peace next book.
So this book, I should say,
This
they
book,
find
yes.
some level of common ground going forward. But for this book, she is squarely in the antagonistic category
Yep.
and does not move.
Nope.
She's got her feet planted.
The Aries kids are what you would expect. A little stereotypical, but I get it, Rick. You wanted to paint them right. You said, look at all these guys.
I do wonder, and I don't remember if this is touched in any of the books. There have to be like some demigods that jive better with other cabins than their own, right? Like, do you think that there's a kid, like an Aries kid, that's just like, God, you guys are so loud. Like, I can't deal with you. I'm gonna go hang with the Apollo guys and like work on
It's a
my
bad
archery.
example. Jack, you literally just described Frank. It's a bad example because he's a son of Mars, but
Well,
you
right,
know
that's the
Frank.
difference.
That is true, but like you just described Frank. He's an archer. He would so much rather be a child of Apollo. Specifically, he says that because he likes archery.
Mm-hmm.
He's calm, he's soft spoken. He would not fit in well. If you're looking for other off type examples, Piper, before she becomes counselor for Aphrodite Cabin, specifically talks about how she always feels much more included and normal in Athena Cabin because she
That's right.
thinks before she does anything instead of just being like, I'll succeed because I'm pretty.
That's true. Yeah, I have not read all of the books in the
Heroes of
Heroes of
Olympus.
Olympus series, and I have only read the first couple of books like once, and that was like when they came out. So I have forgotten quite a lot from those.
But there you go. Those are a couple
But
off
yes.
types. So it does happen, and it's usually complicated. And actually, further in this novel, we're not there yet. It's next chapter when they actually have dinner. We see them all eat at their cabin tables. And for this one, everyone eats at their assigned table. But by the time you get to the Heroes of Olympus series, they're like, I'm going to go eat over there. I don't
Mm-hmm.
really care why. And so I think that's just also something that kind of, as the book goes on, or as the series goes on, rather, you kind of break down and it's like, I guess the status quo changed after Percy was there, just because we had to know what the status quo was
Right.
to have some of the exposition make sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
Ooh, the cabins are divided. Oh,
Yes.
scary. You know,
Yep.
the tension of like the capture the flag doesn't work as well if there's an Aries kid who's like more war oriented and less anger and fury oriented. And it's just like,
Right.
honestly, I want to hang out with the Athena kids. They're
I like
coming
the
up with
Athena
really good
cabin.
battle
Yeah.
plans. Like,
Yes.
you guys are just running in. We're children of war. Why not
Mm-hmm.
think first?
Exactly. And that's where, like, to make like a pop culture reference, I would think like Rambo is like probably like a child of Aries, but
Yeah.
Rambo would love to hang with the Athena cabin. He'd be like, yeah, I could make all sorts of traps for you guys. I'm thinking about we put them in a bottleneck here, and then I'm gonna drop a log on their head. And the Athena cabin would be like, fuck yeah, dude, sure, go wild.
So as with the series goes on, we'll get some more off
We'll see
type
some more.
characters.
Yeah.
Yeah. Although
Uh,
first we have to get a lot more on type characters, starting of
yes.
course with, as we just talked about, Clarisse LaRue, and then moving to the Hermes cabin where we'll get a lot more on type characters as well.
Yes, that's true. But we have to still talk a little bit about Chiron because we learn a couple of
That's
things
true.
about him here. We learned that finally, officially, properly, this is the Chiron. And Percy asks a blunt, but again, a solid question. Shouldn't you be dead? And then Chiron pauses, like, nobody's really asked me that. And says, I honestly don't know about should be. And this I really like. I find this, for all the shit that I've been throwing at Chiron, this concept I think is really, really cool. He says, the truth is, I can't be dead. You see, eons ago, the gods granted my wish. I could continue the work I loved. I could be a teacher of heroes as long as humanity needed me. And I gained much from that wish, and I gave up much. But I'm still here, so I can only assume that I'm needed. And that concept of his one wish was to be a teacher for as long as he is needed is such a beautiful like motive. Think about that existence. Imagine being able to know that you're needed because you're still alive. Like you have an unceasing purpose. For as long as you are breathing, you know that there is a purpose you can tend to.
Yeah, it paints him almost, to me, I wrote that this makes him feel like a cosmic force.
Yes.
All things remain the same. There will always be a need for heroes, and there will always be a need for someone to teach and train those heroes.
Yes.
And it really is beautiful. And I got to give credit where credit is due. This is a Rick original. This isn't like a wish that we hear from Chiron at any point in mythology. So Rick took this idea of this character who's always painted as a teacher and just ran with it. And again, I almost wonder if there's a little bit of projection of his own feeling.
Oh, yes. There's gotta be.
Oh, 100%, right? It's that feeling of he always wants to do and give back to the world. And I think that's what makes him someone that I at least look at as, very parasocial relationship, but as someone that I can look at and go, he feels like a good person. He feels like he wants what's best for the world because that's what he's trying to put out there. And in a weird way, I think the Percy Jackson novels could be read as his Chiron, his eternal teacher for heroes and goodness going forward.
Mm-hmm.
That's the English minor coming out again, but I like that.
Hey, man, I like that analysis, so I'm going to go with it too.
Something that is less likable, but again feels accurate, is does it ever get boring? No, no, he said. Horribly depressing at times, but never boring. I imagine the 1,000-yard stare
Oh,
returns.
yeah.
Percy says, "Why depressing?" And Chiron just never responds.
And that is definitely Rick speaking from experience. Let's take a moment. Shout out to teachers, dog. Shout out to
True.
teachers. So
You guys
important.
are real heroes.
I have friends that are teachers. They are teaching the youth at several different grade levels, and their job is really fucking hard. And they are some of the best people that I know, period. So,
Oh, it's such a selfless act, especially today.
yes. Oh my God. Yeah. So, everybody, take a moment. Think about the teachers that have impacted you. And, if you're still able to get in contact with them, I know this sounds a little weird, shoot them a note, say thanks. I've done that with some of my past teachers that were very impactful on me and just given them life updates. And it legitimately, I think, made their entire year to know that they're not forgotten about. So, just again, thesis, shout out to teachers. They're the best. If only Chiron was not a tricky little bastard every other time he speaks, which he does again. He says, "Why depressing?" And then he just doesn't. He just doesn't answer again. It says, "Oh look, there's Annabeth. Hello."
Hi, Annabeth. Oh, look over there. This, I think, is what really makes this chapter.
Yes.
And when you don't get this in either the movie, because then Grover does it, or the show, because then Luke does it, I understand why they didn't do it in the show. I disagree. I think you need to build this relationship. And when you rush into it later in the show, it does feel like you're missing the basis of what Percy and Annabeth is supposed to be.
Mhm.
This does so much for establishing how those characters interact, why they interact the way they do, how they see one another. From the very first moment, Annabeth is really trying to make the most for Percy. You've got to do better than that. I thought you were
Mhm.
the one. I still think you're the one. She's got a really high ideal for him and she holds him to it. And then I think that's why they work so well together as characters. They push each other to be better. Percy challenges everything, every notion she has, and she just wants Percy to be better.
Yes. Totally agree. And you are never, ever going to hear me complain about too much Annabeth.
Oh,
I
yeah.
love the chapter. Everything before this, again, we talked about, is very solid. It's very good, compelling, interesting, mysterious. But this is where I think the chapter really starts hitting its stride. And I just love the foundation being properly laid out. We've already got the foundation with Grover, right? That is one instrumental relationship for this book and this upcoming quest that has been laid out. We know what it looks like. We got it down pat. And this is where we can start fleshing out Annabeth more. And I love it. I love that when we see her, she's reading a book and she's just immediately critically checking out Percy. And I like that he thinks that, oh, she's still thinking about how much I drool. Like there is a level of, I don't want to say contempt, but like maybe dissatisfaction, secondhand embarrassment, maybe. Like, this is the guy? this is him? Really?
I know, right? I also look at it as Percy has this like, I mean, instant crush on her, but also like, oh God, she's seen me drool. She's judging me already. And I like that because it shows his naivety. Everything that you need to know about Annabeth being summed up from her few appearances, knowing that Chiron trusts her despite her being Percy's age as well, which makes her a younger camper. And she's just sitting here casually reading a book in ancient Greek.
About
And like,
architecture.
it's literally everything you need to know about her character in less than a paragraph.
Mm-hmm. And Chiron just says, all right, Annabeth, I've got master's archery class at noon. You can take Percy. And she said, hits him with the yes, sir.
The yes, sir, and then drops him
And
off at
then
the
there they
Red
go.
Cross ward.
Yep. That's right. Goes over to an old cabin, threshold worn down by brown paint that's peeling. And, over the doorway, one of the doctor symbols, specifically a winged pole with two snakes wrapped around it. And you know what? Props to Percy for knowing what it's called.
Mm-hmm.
He says, what did they call it? Oh, yeah, a caduceus. Now, I'm sure that we'll talk a little bit about this once we get to some of the myth stuff. But much like I associated pomegranates with Hades as opposed to Hera, I thought the caduceus was an Asclepius thing.
Jack, I'm so glad that you pointed that out. So, Asclepius's staff, the true staff of medicine, actually only has one snake on it. And it is Hermes' magic wand that has the two snakes. And so what ends up happening is they frequently get mixed up because Hermes is just a much more well-known god. So when the American medical system started to be like, oh, we should put like Greek stuff on our buildings to show that we're cultured and we know medicine, put that one on there. It's the stick with the snake. They got the wrong stick with the snake.
Now, all right, to be fair, how many sticks with snakes can one mythology have?
Two.
I feel like
There's only two.
I know, but like should I get it. And that sounds incredibly patronizing when you say two. I know. But at the same time, it's like somebody says, "Oh yeah, the caduceus, Asclepius, the myth, he's got the wand with the snake." It's like, "All right, great. There we go. We got it." You wouldn't
When
think,
we get
oh, what are the odds that there's another snake wand? And if you would think that, Connor, you're better than me.
When we get to the Asclepius breakdown all the way in House of Hades, Jack, you're gonna eat your words when you find out how upset that makes him. There is like a full tirade that he goes on about how Hermes is always stealing his glory. I'm the one who heals people, not him.
Well, his trademark should have been a little bit more memorable.
But that is a caduceus. You can wave. You can say hi to George and Martha. We'll talk about them later. Those are the snakes.
And yeah, this is where we get to see another one of the horrible, fucked up realities of Camp Half-Blood. This cabin, in which the vast majority of campers are, is way overcrowded. It is set up specifically like a gym where the Red Cross had set up an evacuation center, which is really nowhere for long-term housing. Like, that is absolutely not where a bunch of growing children should be crammed in. Again, I hate to be cinema sins. I hate to get nitpicky. Why don't they just build an overflow cabin somewhere else? Because then would it be like, ooh, because Hermes now has more cabins than like Zeus and all the others? Okay.
I actually do have an answer for this. It's not an answer that's going to make you feel good, but it'll at least satiate from a lore perspective. It is that Hermes' cabin cannot be bigger than any of the like big three. So it can't be bigger than Zeus's, and he can't have more than one. And with that, Percy gets literally a section of floor later, and we'll get there, but like that's all he gets. There's not a lot of room in here. Every other cabin is proud to be a member of that cabin. The Ares kids have an ugly ass cabin and they love it. They love every aspect of it. None of the Hermes kids have that same thing. And I think that's what you're really supposed to see and feel here is the lack of belief in the gods. When Luke, starts talking and bringing Percy in, it's all performative. he doesn't actually believe in any of those tenets, or at the very least, he doesn't believe that Hermes believes them.
Yeah, and we've said this before, there are going to be points throughout this entire series where we hear about something and we say, oh, yeah, Luke was right. And
Yeah.
this cabin is the epitome of, yeah, Luke was right. This is so beyond cruel and disgusting that there are children relegated to sleeping on the floor because, gods forbid, literally, gods forbid that they have an overflow cabin so kids can sleep on like cots.
And I know that you're saying, like, we're going to keep saying Luke was right. What I like about this series is it is also going to tell you Luke was right. Percy will have one eternal, immortal wish. He could wish to be a god. And instead he goes, yeah, I wish that you guys would take better fucking care of your kids.
Yeah, be better parents, you deadbeats.
Like, that's his whole thing, is this is the problem. He walks into Camp Half-Blood, he sees all these beautiful things, and then he will have to live in this cabin for less than a week. And he goes, that's the problem I want to fix. And I love that he sees this and he thinks, that's not right.
Yeah.
Good on him.
That, I feel like, good on him. At the same time, it's like, yeah, duh. Of course it's not
also,
right.
yeah, duh. But he walks in, he trips on the way in. And again, just really hammering home the feeling that this place isn't the same as any of the other cabins we've been to. Percy is met with groans.
God, I'm gonna lose my extra like 4 inches of space on the floor now because we got this new kid.
Yeah. But Luke feels like he really does care for these other kids. He shows up, he says hello, he says, hey guys, be nice, that's what we're here for. And it's hard because he's a villain and he will do awful things, but at the same time it's like, he's not evil. He's genuinely misled and misguided, specifically intentionally to do awful things, and it is 100% the fault of the gods.
Yes.
And
yes,
Hermes will
he's a
even
victim.
confirm as much.
Yeah.
He is a victim. And they are going to let him be the sacrificial lamb that wins their war. Obviously, we know that some of these problems do get fixed, but oh boy, it is a long road to get there for the gods to atone for these sins.
It is a very long road. But we've still got a long road to get to all the sins that Luke commits too. Because now, we just get to meet what can honestly only be described as like every summer camp heartthrob counselor. That is basically how he's described. He's 19. He looks cool. He's tall and muscular. He's got short, sandy hair and a friendly smile. He's wearing his Camp Half-Blood shirt as a tank top. He's got on, the cutoffs and sandals. And this is where I think the first time we're introduced to the necklaces and the beads, correct?
It is. Yep.
So we get to see that he's got this leather necklace with the 5 different colored clay beads on them. And that the only thing that was a little unnerving is that there's this thick white scar that goes from just under his right eye all the way down to his jaw, like an old knife slash. Which, how does Percy know what an old knife slash looks like? Educated guess, maybe? I don't know.
Gabe's got some funny friends.
That's actually fair. Very fair. I guess he did live in New York City. He
did live in New York City.
That's true. Yeah, that's true.
But
we get to see a different side of Annabeth here. Very different from the kind of condescending and calculated know-it-all girl, almost like Miss Perfect that we've seen thus far. And it's she says, this is Luke. And he says that her voice sounds different. And so Percy looks over and it's like, I swear she's blushing. But then Annabeth notices that Percy sees some cracks in her hardened exterior and she shuts it down. And she says, he's your counselor for now. Another thing that's interesting, although we don't know what the clay beads are right now, we will eventually learn. Earlier in this chapter, when Chiron was talking about Grover's failure the first time with being 5 years ago, it specifically noted that Luke has 5 beads on his necklace.
Yep.
Which, again,
beads, baby.
planting several seeds and they're growing in tandem, which I just thought was a good bit of organic world building.
It's so well done. There's so many little details that are so intentional. And honestly, the beads are just another really cool detail. I love that. It builds this feeling of camaraderie.
Another thing we learn, even though we had heard the term undetermined or regular a little bit earlier, and that's why everybody groaned because Percy's undetermined, we learned that cabin 11, although being the cabin of Hermes, takes literally all newcomers and any visitor that's here. So that is why the cabin is so filled to the brim with children. It's not just that Hermes gets around and is like laying crazy pipe. It's that if you are the child of a god and it is not one of the main gods, you are just stuck here. You're stuck here. You are othered. You are not part of the in group. You are basically a guest in this other deity's cabin. How
Yeah.
gracious. Have a spot on the corner and the floor.
It speaks for itself. And I actually do have something. We'll come back when we talk about Hermes and his role as the patron of travelers and thieves a little bit later, because I again think there is a little bit of literary import to this as a kind of middle ground place. Again, Percy is still finding his way. He's kind of still traveling. We'll talk more again about Hermes as a chthonic deity, a deity that is related to the underworld, and how I think that plays in as well. But how long will you be here? Until you're determined. And then Annabeth is like, all right, you're screwing this up. We gotta go. And there it is. I'll show you the volleyball court. I've already seen it.
I've
Thanks,
already
Rick.
seen it. Come on. She grabs his wrist. It's very something that stuck out to me here too that just made me, it's just so depressing, is Percy looks at the tiny section of the floor that he'd been allotted, and it's this line here. I had nothing to put there to mark it as my own. No luggage, no clothes, no sleeping bag, just the Minotaur's horn. And it's followed up with a joke, right? Which is like, I thought about setting that down, but then I remembered that Hermes was also the god of thieves. But just let's sit with that for a second. This is the first time that Percy's really thought, like, holy shit, I have nothing. I have literally nothing. I have no stuff that's mine. This is the first point where Percy really comes to terms with the fact that he has literally nothing. He has lost everything in the most literal sense of the word. He lost his mom. He doesn't have a dad. He doesn't even know who his dad is, and people are laughing at him because he might never find out who he is. He only has the clothes that he's wearing and this thing that he ripped from the creature that killed his mom. Doesn't that just make you want to curl up into a ball and cry? Like, that's what I want to do.
And it explains his resentment. The very next interaction with Annabeth, where she's like, you've got to do better. You know how many kids would have loved the opportunity? And Percy's like, you're kidding, right? Like, that's what you want out of this? It's really sad. And he's so right. To get killed? That's what you people want? And to a certain extent, especially it seems for a lot of the kids in the Hermes cabin who are undetermined, that would be the opportunity to
prove
kind
themselves,
of prove
get
themselves.
glory. Yep.
It's literally like a meritocracy for parental affection.
Yes. There are a bunch of kids that I'm sure were just sitting in their floor space, and they suddenly hear about this new kid that just showed up and killed the Minotaur, and they were thinking, like, are you fucking serious? Some newbie who has no idea what's going on killed the Minotaur? Great. All right. Good to know that, you know, the best shot that we had at potentially having our parents claim us is just totally flown the coop. That's awesome.
Yep. And you know what's worse is they would all have been right, because a few days later, Percy does get claimed, and literally everything that they would have thought in that moment, if that's what they were thinking, would have just been proved correctly. Yep, he got what he wanted. Looks like it worked.
Percy's got it so easy.
Annabeth tries to confirm and tell him, you're living the high life. And he's like, I do not get it, but sure. The thing that got me is when she goes, Chiron calls them archetypes. Huh?
Mm-hmm.
That's a word we'll never see again.
Yeah, I like the idea of it. I understand why they didn't play with it anymore, but it was a
Yeah.
neat little, like, that was very clearly something that's like, throw it out there, see if it sticks. It didn't. All right. We're going to just never talk about that again.
There's absolutely a universe where instead of doing House of Hades, they do something more with this. But I think that when you inevitably see House of Hades, where the monsters literally just are specifically reborn again and head up the elevator
Yep.
and are just at the surface world, this starts to go, all right, so it's not exactly correct, but you know what? Good enough.
Yeah. And the most important thing is that we learn monsters don't die. They can be
Yes.
killed, but they don't die. And, they are
Including Mrs.
soulless. They are dispelled, and they can be dispelled for a very, very long time. A whole lifetime, potentially, but they will effectively just respawn after a certain
Yeah.
point. So that Minotaur that you killed, you might not see him in your lifetime, God's willing, but somebody else will, have to deal
Yup.
with him probably. And then, of course, he
And
thinks about Mrs. Dodds. He's like, uh-oh. So if I killed one with a sword, and this is so interesting. Annabeth is throwing around Minotaur left, right, and center, but catches
yup.
herself saying Fury and then corrects herself and says, oh, your math teacher. So again, do names have power? Do they not? I don't know. I guess we're still in this liminal space where we're just going to see. We're going to see what happens.
Yup.
Anyways, names have power. You shouldn't call them by name, even here. Even though I just said Minotaur,
Even
we also
here.
just said Zeus and Hera, whatever. At
It's
this point,
fine.
I might mention it as it happens in the future. I'm not going to make a point to point out how
Yeah.
that is a thing anymore. It makes no sense. It's going to be forgotten. Moving on.
Yep.
But it is funny that Percy's like, look, can we say anything here without it thundering?
No. Apparently the answer is no. And especially, he points over at the other cabins too. He's like, I sound whiny, but like, also, why do I have to stay there? There's literally open bunks. Another great Percy line is just followed up with, my mom is Sally Jackson.
Mhm.
Preach it, friend.
Yeah, I do like that Annabeth tries to get him to figure it out on his own. It's like, you don't just choose a cabin, Percy. It depends on who your parents are, or, you know, your parent. And then she just stares at him, and you can like hear the hamster wheel in his head fucking spinning at Mach 1, trying to put
He
the pieces
says,
together. And he says,
where's Sally Jackson
no,
cabin?
he's like, oh yeah, well, my mom, Sally Jackson, she works at a candy store in Grand Central Station. At least she used to. And Annabeth, good on her, does not outright call him an idiot. She's like, sorry about your mom. That is not what I mean. Your other
Yep.
parent, your dad. And again, hamster wheel, just going fucking in overdrive right now. Versus, well, he's dead. I
Dead.
never
Never
knew him.
knew him.
And Annabeth just sighs.
Exasperated? Sad?
Uh-huh.
Both.
Yeah.
Probably both.
And so you say, oh, what a twist. Your father's not dead. And again, Percy is just, what a guy. How can you say that? You know him? These two very big pieces, these big clear pieces of the puzzle, just not fitting together. He's
Nah.
got a square peg and he's putting it in a round hole right now. And it is not working for him.
Well, and then she just goes on to break down his entire life story.
Oh,
You don't know anything about me. Well, actually,
she
he's
hits
like,
him with
all
the
right.
Sherlock Holmes. She
Yep.
Sherlock Holmes him. Yeah, I bet you were kicked out of schools. Or like Hannibal Lecter. Just dresses him down to a T. Says probably you got dyslexia, probably ADHD too.
I mean, again, she's just literally knows him so well. Annabeth then goes and plays teacher, tells him all about ambrosia and nectar. And I just enjoy that her explaining this is like, hey, you are a demigod. Get it through your thick skull. If you weren't, you would be ashes. Sorry, we didn't know you were a demigod. We were pretty sure, but like, you're not on fire, so you are.
Yes, I do like how she, again, very much specifies after saying, it would have turned your blood to fire and your bones to sand. You'd be dead.
I
Just
need
in
to make this
case.
so clear.
I
You
no
cannot be
room.
sand
That's
and
right.
alive.
Even if you're a demigod, even if you're a half-blood, you will die if those things happen. Don't get any thoughts.
And then, of course, who would come around other than Clarisse LaRue?
All wearing
Annabeth
their
tells her,
camo
go to
jacket.
the crows, which I hunted for. And apparently the few, or at least for me, the few places that I could find this reference are actually in some philosophy texts. And so it basically, it means go to hell.
Yes.
So go to the crows means go to hell.
Well,
There you
first
go.
she says that Clarisse should go and polish her spear, which I did like. That was funny.
No,
But
that is
now
very fun.
we're laying out this rivalry. There's something happening on Friday night. Annabeth is going to get pulverized. And then as there's trash talking happens, Clarisse just like a mad dog, eyes lit over to Percy. He's like, who's this wrong? Annabeth, again, I will defend her all the time. And I suppose there's no use in hiding Percy from Clarisse. But I can't help but feel like Annabeth perhaps could have done a better job of saying, you know what? Fuck off, Clarisse. I don't have to tell you shit. Percy, let's get out of here. And then just leaving Clarisse for a future time.
I don't disagree. But because I always give Annabeth the benefit of the doubt, reminder that she has thought that Percy is part of the prophecy. And Clarisse will even, walk away going, can't believe they thought he was Big Three material. So clearly the rumor is going around that Percy might be a child of Zeus, Poseidon, or Hades. So Annabeth might just be looking at it like, well, this is one way to find out if you've got
That's
powers
true.
and what they are.
That's
Like,
really
and she's
cruel.
right.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
I mean, and you
She is
say it's
right.
cruel, but in her mind, if
No.
she's going, hey, if he's a child of the Big Three, this is going to end poorly for Clarisse, not for him.
Yeah.
And she's right.
And I get it. Again, I am not saying that what she did was wrong, right? But, I just maybe I'm too kind. Maybe I'm just a little too kind. My thought would be I don't want to deal with Clarisse right now, and I don't want to have to deal with the aftermath of a Clarisse Percy dust up. If he's not Big
Yeah.
Three, then great. Now I've got to console this child who just lost his mother and
Yeah.
just got mercilessly, relentlessly bullied during the orientation. Or, oh, hell yeah, Big Three. Oh, wait, Clarisse just died. Like, yeah, Big Three.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, you know what, Percy, let's go. I'm going to give you a swirly. And she's like, giving him a swirly, and then is like, lightning strikes her and she's electrocuted. Or like,
Yeah, or if
if
he
it's
was a child of
fucking
Hades and the
Hades,
ground opened and
right?
swallowed her. Yeah.
Exactly. She's sucked into the maw of the earth. Or like a fucking skeleton just pops out of somewhere. I don't know. Like, there's a lot of other factors to keep in mind in either way that in any way that it shakes out. If I were Annabeth, I'd be like, I do not want to deal with this right now. It's something to keep in my back pocket for later. Or, be like, hey, throw them at you and capture the flag. We'll see what happens.
Mm-hmm. We do get our first wise girl. Stay out of it, wise girl, from
Mhm.
Clarisse.
Kids fucking suck. Because the idea that somehow wise girl, which I would think is actually a compliment, has
It
been
is a compliment.
weaponized, is like, God damn, only a child can turn something either so mundane or nonsensical or a straight up compliment into an insult that makes you want to just disappear and have never
Yep.
existed in the first place.
I mean, for what it's worth, Percy, he throws hands back actually right before this when he says, oh, that explains the bad smell, which is like, all right, now you're just trying to get yourself into
Yes.
this problem.
I love, dude, he can hold his own. He's
He
spunky.
can.
Like, he's dealt with shithead kids his entire life. This is just another new school for him. I like the back and forth that Rick does. He's just so good with snappy dialogue, where Clarisse growls, we got an initiation ceremony for newbies, Percy, whatever.
Yeah.
It's so good. And I think I've said this before. Apologies if I have, but I will reiterate, Rick would write such a fucking good Spider-Man story just from like dialogue alone. That
Oh my gosh,
back
you
and
have not
forth
said that yet so
quick.
far, so
I haven't
preach
said
it.
that.
Yes.
Yes. This is like the snappiness, how quick it is, the wit, the back and forth. It is just so, to me, makes me think of like Spider-Man.
Oh
And
yeah.
I think that there is that kind of energy throughout, from what I remember, the remainder of this book, but the rest of the series as well.
Oh
And
yeah.
I just, I eat that shit up. It's so good.
Oh, it's fantastic. I would love to read, honestly, any comic that was a Rick Riordan written one. I think that would be really, really fun.
Mm-hmm.
But
And like perhaps a Peter Parker before being bit by the spider, Percy's got to take his licks. He's the new kid.
yep.
He's got to earn his rep. And I like that instead of like holding on to the Minotaur horn, he gives it to Annabeth to fight instead of being like, I am going to stab you.
Yeah, I have this giant weapon that I use to kill a monster.
He has some
Here,
level
take this.
he has some level of like respect and decorum when it comes to rules of engagement for a schoolyard fight, and I appreciate that. And he's fighting back against Clarisse. He's kicking, he's punching, and Percy says he's been in plenty of fights, but this Clarisse is just a fucking monster. Drags him, and like I get why. It does add extra insult that he is dragged into the girls' bathroom. And I like that they really emphasize how fucking nasty the toilets are. It is like any public restroom. And I
Well, and
like
then you
that.
just have on top of it the Percy classic ADHD thought. Sorry to interrupt. I think this is exactly where you were going. Of if this place belonged to the gods, they should have
Yes.
been able to afford classier
Well, see,
Johns.
that's the thing. Yes, absolutely. Also, they have money. We just learned that they have a stream of steady income. And if they aren't getting stuff from the gods for some reason, they could, like, I don't know, pay to have a satyr do a Home Depot run or something. I don't know. Go grab some new toilets, like something. There's got to be something they could do. It's just, and that is something where, yeah, could you blame the gods for it? Yes.
Sure.
At the end of the day, you absolutely could. But this is on the people that are at camp right now. Chiron, what the fuck? Why aren't you emphasizing cleaning these fucking bathrooms?
I mean, at the very least, Percy does manage to not have to be subjected to the stinky toilet, so that's good.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone else does,
That's true.
and thus the supreme lord of the bathroom is crowned.
There he comes. I do like, as this is all happening, Annabeth specifically is in the corner. And she's not just removed herself or like fully watching, she's watching through her fingers, like, oh no. Like there is at
Don't
least
do it.
some
Oh.
level, there's some level of sympathy or maybe even empathy with this. Like this is just it's gotta happen. Sorry, kid.
I wrote down, aha, stomach magic, because Percy just feels a tug in the pit of his stomach and then whoosh. Where did that magic come from? I don't know. I was going to puke, and I thought, what would not make me puke? Shooting water out of the toilets at other people. Sure,
Exactly.
Percy.
This isn't actually a Poseidon thing. If you have control over your diaphragm, you can actually control water.
Explode toilet.
Yeah, that's a little known fact about just a thing that anybody can do.
And then Annabeth, so smart. I was literally just talking about how I think that, any situation, she's like got the right of way. She looks and she goes, how did you? And I'm like, you gotta ask. You thought he was big three materials and he just made water explode from everywhere and you're confused?
Maybe she was genuinely curious about the mechanics of it.
Where did all that water come from?
Like, did you do that by choice? How did you do that? Not necessarily
That's
like,
fair.
whoa, how did you do that? There's again, some more of this just like snark where
Yeah.
Clarice says, "You are dead, new boy. You're totally dead." And Percy even admits, she's like, "I probably should have let it go, but I said, you want to
Yep.
gargle with toilet water again, Clarice? Close your mouth."
Oh, it's so good.
It's
No,
so
I
good.
I highlighted that line. I didn't have any notes. I just really like it. It's fantastic. Well,
And with that, Annabeth sets us up that she wants Percy on her team for capture the flag.
very smart. Very
Mm-hmm.
smart. So unless you have anything that you would like to talk about per the actual chapter, we can leave the smelly camp bathrooms and find a seat somewhere nearby to talk some notes.
I love it.
So I figure we can start with a short one. 12 Olympians. Now, this isn't really like a myth. There's no origin for why are there 12 because there were like, I don't know, 12 magic thing. Nope. But I have some actual just history. The earliest records that we have of 12 gods in the various cults of ancient Greek starts to crop up around 600 BC. So, not super early. 12 god groupings are actually pretty common throughout various cults throughout ancient Greece. It seems like once it caught on hard. One of the biggest pieces of evidence and earliest pieces of evidence that we have of this is that we know there was an altar to 12 gods in Athens that was built roughly 521 or 522 BC. We actually don't know what 12 gods they were, though, because it was deconstructed in 267 AD by, I believe, some Romans. So,
Sounds about right.
whoopsie. But we know it was there because a lot of the historical records at the time use this as a measurement point for Athens. So if you were to measure to Athens, you would go, well, measure it based on the temple to these 12 gods. And we also have various stories that describe 12 gods or 12 altars or 12 sacrifices. Hercules or Heracles in the Greek version at some point has to make sacrifices to the gods, and it's mentioned that he makes 12 sacrifices when he's born. Hermes makes 12 sacrifices. So it's a pretty common thing for there to be 12 gods. Most of the lists are the ones that you would expect: Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, Demeter, Ares, Athena, Apollo, Artemis, Hephaestus, Aphrodite, Hermes, and then Dionysus. However, that is interchangeable in many lists with Hestia. That's also the order I just listed them in, is the cabin order, which is meant to be roughly indicative of their kind of seniority as gods. Which is funny because Zeus is specifically the youngest of Hera, Poseidon, and Demeter, but nevertheless, he's the big guy, so he gets to be number one. And so that's it. I think it's interesting how we get to 12 gods. The list is apparently genuinely open to change. Dionysus starts to appear as his cult becomes greater and more important. But other lists apparently did have other gods that just didn't make it or got merged. So kind of fun. 12 Olympians. Next, let's talk about Hermes. And before we ever got into Hermes' cabin, we saw the caduceus on the front door.
Yes.
Standing above. And as you put it, isn't that Asclepius's thing? Specifically, no. So Asclepius is a son of Apollo, because Apollo is the god of medicine. And Asclepius does his own thing, and we will talk about his magic wand later. Hermes is notably always kind of in this ephemeral space of what is he actually the god of? And we'll get to that more in a second. But a big trope of his is he does magic. Not all the other gods are explicitly associated with like traditional point a wand and cast a spell magic. Hermes is. And the caduceus is his wand. We've got a couple of stories that get us to how he got it, but the most accepted version is that Hermes is born, and immediately the first thing he does is goes and steals Apollo's cows. He steals Apollo's sacred cattle. Apollo shows up. He's like, hey, man, what the hell? And Hermes is like, oops, I was literally born yesterday. How about I make it up to you? I found a tortoise shell and I made it into an instrument. Here, I call it a lyre. And he hands it to Apollo, and Apollo goes, all right, this is actually pretty cool. You can have my staff as a gift of friendship. And they become buds.
That's adorable.
Now, that does differ very slightly from Percy Jackson lore. In the Percy Jackson origin story that is like on the wiki and in the versions here, it's all the exact same. The lyre is given as for, hey, sorry I stole your cows, here's this instrument. And then for that, Apollo forgives him, but it's then actually later that Hermes makes a second instrument, a shepherd's pipe, the first ever shepherd's pipe, because he's also a god of shepherds. And he trades that for Apollo's golden staff, which becomes the caduceus. And it's also with that trade that Apollo becomes the god of music, as Hermes gives him another instrument and Apollo kind of trades out the magic staff for the gift of music instead, which is kind of nice. Here's one where I actually really like the changes that come in the Percy Jackson canon version of the story.
Yeah, that is a cool change. I honestly, I think I prefer that.
Me too. There is another version of how the Caduceus came to be, and this one's real weird. So,
All right,
do you
hold
remember?
on. Let's just before we dive into that, Connor, we've talked about a lot of very weird things already. We're only 6 chapters in, and the myths have ranged from being kind of like, oh, that's neat, to like, yep, that's somebody fucking a bull, and they had tools to assist with fucking the bull. On a scale of, what is
On
something normal we've talked about? What is something normal that we've talked about in the myths?
I mean, we talked about Hermes trading a pipe for the staff.
All right, sure. We'll talk about, yeah, bartering, trade and bartering on a scale of trade and bartering between newly minted friends to I am lusting for this bull and the bull will only have sex with me if I am inside a contraption to look like a female bull. Where is this level of weird that you're about to relay? Like, where does that sit?
In context, like a 3 or a 4.
Gotcha. Okay.
It's not that weird.
Okay.
Or at the very least, it's a lot shorter and more straightforward in its weirdness. So, Jack, have you read the Odyssey? You
I
have,
have.
right?
Yes.
Okay. Do you remember how Odysseus, when he goes to the underworld, he meets with a prophet?
Yes.
Okay, that prophet's name is Tiresias. And generally speaking, in Greek mythology, people really like Tiresias because he's just a really good prophet, I guess. Okay, fair enough. In the version of how Hermes gets the Caduceus that is, and this is a very niche version, it's not related to the other stories, it's not like one that cropped up afterward as like an explanation for other things. This is probably just a separate story that then got kind of lumped in and they went, I don't know, that staff was probably this staff. So Tiresias the prophet found 2 snakes getting it on, and he looks over at them and he says, well, I don't like that. And he whacks one of them and he smacks the snake, kills it. And he kills the female snake and is immediately turned into a woman because of it.
What?
Yep, that is the whole story. And so then the staff has 1 snake on it because he killed the female snake and he smacked. And then he stays that way for 7 years because he can't find 2 snakes getting it on again. But 7 years later, he sees 2 more snakes getting it on. He goes whack and he kills the male snake. He changes back to a man. And that's the whole story. And then it ends with just, and Hermes found the Caduceus later.
That's amazing. Oh my god. that that might be my favorite one so far.
It's short, it's
I just
sweet, and it makes you say, what?
I love the idea that this guy saw 2 snakes fucking and was like, cannot abide. Absolutely not.
Not on my green earth.
That's so great. And then for like 7 years, he was probably looking. He's like, God, I gotta find some snakes that are just super horny. Where are they?
Yep. That's it. That's it. That's the whole story.
I love
So
that.
the extra like fun detail here is that we don't really, again, outside of these 2 origins, it's one of the things that's like, okay, we don't really have a lot of contesting myths. It's one of these 2 things. What's cool though is we can actually probably draw a line all the way back to where this first came from. Like where the idea of Hermes as a god, as well as this being a symbol, comes from. And in ancient Babylonian culture, there was a Babylonian god who served as a mediator between humans and deities. And he had 2 snakes coiled around a staff to represent communication. The 2 snakes interacting with one another was a symbol of like finding peace in the middle. And so Hermes is often talked about as probably originating from that ancient Babylonian deity who also branched out to become probably Thoth, the Egyptian god of knowledge, is considered to, in many cultures, be the same god as Hermes. So it's kind of cool.
That is very neat.
So let's talk about 2 of Hermes' actual tenets then. He is the patron god of thieves and travelers. And if you had to guess which one of those came first, Jack, which one do you think it was?
Between thieves or travelers?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it probably started as travelers, but people were like, God, these travelers keep stealing a lot of stuff.
You would think, but you'd be wrong.
I'm incorrect? Cut this out.
So,
Cut this out. I can't be wrong. Cut it.
remember how I was just saying that Hermes was literally born and then the exact next thing he did was go and steal Apollo's cattle?
Yes.
He's a trickster god. So he's always been associated with theft, actually, before he was associated with travelers. So Homeric Hymn 4 tells that whole story of Hermes and his birth and stealing the sacred cattle. And that comes from sometime in the 600s BC ish, probably the earlier 600s, closer to the year 700 BC. But Hermes, as a god and where he comes from and his origins, actually has a strong association with the underworld and death. So originally, he was a psychopomp. Psychopomp is any deity or divine spirit that leads souls from the living to the dead, basically, from the world of the mortals to the underworld. And so what happened was Hermes started as this, I bring you from one place to the next. And that was what transferred into the idea of him encompassing all roads, travelers. But, he became a god of boundaries and commerce and all that sort of thing comes out of the idea of him being the god of the boundary between life and death. And then slowly that just being attributed to all forms of travel. That being said, that is what I wanted to bring up earlier and why I think it's interesting that Percy gets to Camp Half-Blood and first spends his time in Hermes' cabin. Hermes' role as a psychopomp, and especially if you continue the metaphor that I've kind of been on about, because I'm kind of really digging the metaphor of the death of Percy's old life and all that, because it just keeps working. And here again, if Hermes is a psychopomp, Hermes' cabin is literally helping Percy move from his life as immortal to his life as demigod. In fact, this quest is a catabasis. Percy is going to go to the underworld. He is literally going to be ushered into the underworld after spending time in Hermes' cabin. Because it's not until he moves out of Hermes' cabin that they're like, ooh, shit, we should get you a quest. So, it just all works really well within this sort of understanding of things. That's what I had for today. I thought it was really interesting. I really enjoyed that aspect. And I think it also does a little bit go to provide additional context to why the cabin 11 campers are so much worse off and sadder. It's effectively limbo.
Yeah.
Hermes is the guy who takes you between life and death. He's the guide of souls. And all of them, especially when you think about Luke's perspective, where even once you believe in the gods, it doesn't get any better. There is this moment where you think Luke is lost in limbo. He does not have his father there. He doesn't get to interact with him very often. He's not there to help guide him where he should be going next. And all of these campers in Cabin 11 are struggling with that.
Yeah, they are all a very transient population. I don't know. What do you think would feel better? We'll put ourselves in the shoes of some of these campers. Do you think it would feel better to be in cabin 11 when you arrive and then you are claimed by Hermes and now fuck, I am stuck in cabin 11? Or would you feel better, or at the very least not as bad, staying unclaimed? And then there's at least maybe hope that you are somebody else's kid, but with the pain of not being claimed, am I not good enough? What am I doing wrong? Would that outweigh the potential hope of possibility and knowing that one day you could get out of here?
I'm going to set aside my personal bias that Hermes' kids get lame powers comparatively to all the other campers.
Yeah.
I think that in earnest, I would feel less bad being claimed.
Mm-hmm.
Because especially, I feel like the Hermes cabin kids are described as having some similar features. If you were sitting in that cabin, not having been claimed yet and going, I can be fairly certain that I'm not a child of Hermes. So it really just does mean that, like, my parent just does not care if I have a place at this camp.
Yep.
And it probably means you're a child of a minor god, which means, at least at this point in Camp Half-Blood's history, you are literally chopped liver. They do not care about you. Like, if you're not a child of an Olympian, great, you don't matter. Sucks to suck, I guess.
Yeah,
And
I agree.
that's brutal. I mean, it's what pushes Ethan Nakamura to turn over to the side of Kronos and the Titans. That's one I remember just vividly because it's a character that we don't meet here by name, but Percy will then later go and be like, oh yeah, I recognize that kid. He was in Cabin 11 on my first day there. He looked grumpy as all hell because he doesn't fit in with the rest of the Hermes kids. Turns out his mom is Nemesis. And yeah, final answer, I would rather be claimed as Hermes than not know. Also because then I feel like I'd be sitting around trying to figure out what superpowers I had the whole time. You know?
I get it.
Think about being a kid and being like, oh, I wonder if I could use the Force or have superpowers. Like, you're doing that all the time and it never happens and it's so disappointing every time.
I hear what you're saying. I get it. But there is something to be said about you'd have to play into your strengths, and they have their strengths, and that is, unfortunately, you would have to be a rogue.
Oh, sorry. No, I was saying that, like, if you were undetermined, you would be constantly going, what random minor god
yes.
got with my parent? You would see Percy doing water magic, and you go, oh, maybe my father was a river god.
Gotcha. I thought you were
all right, that didn't work.
Yep. I thought you were talking about how
because at least if you're a Hermes kid, you know what you'd be good at. Yeah. Like, if you're a Hermes kid, you would know what you would be good at. You would know you would be fast. You'd know you have quick fingers. You'd be quick on your feet. If you're undetermined, you're like, what am I good at? You know?
Yeah. I guess, but there is something to be said about, like, there is some whimsy in having effectively unlimited potential. You just pick out the big book of Greek gods and goddesses, and you just start going down the list and just, like, learning a bunch of skills and seeing what clicks and seeing what doesn't.
I feel like I'd be on a Wikipedia page of just every Greek deity that's been recorded and being like, all right, well, we went over the grain god. It's not Demeter. This guy's literally just, his whole thing is wheat. I baked bread. It didn't go well. It came out very gummy.
Yeah, I do agree, though, in that little thought experiment. I think I would much rather be claimed and at the very least have an answer than be unclaimed and stuck with, again, limitless possibilities is, there's something to it, but it's also directionless, and that is terrifying.
Final thoughts on the chapter, Jack? Is there anything else that you would want to talk about or discuss? Obviously, next chapter is a little bit more in-depth, a little bit more exposition, and then we're 2 chapters away from Capture the Flag, which is the real...
I know.
I love Capture the Flag.
This has been a really long episode because this is a long chapter with a lot of stuff in it. It's not one of those long chapters that we said this at the beginning where it's like we were just like, hey, all right, I have no notes for like 3 pages. Like, there was something going on pretty much every page. I am really, really excited. I think next chapter, if I remember properly, that's where we get to see like dinner and all the rituals that go around with that, and we get to spend some more time with these newer characters, which I am very excited for. But we have been saying, I think since episode 1, how like hyped we are for Capture the Flag. Dude, I can taste it. It's like it's right there. I feel like Tantalus right now. It's like just out of reach. It's just out of reach, but it's right at my fingertips.
I'm so right there with you. I mean, who doesn't like the Capture the Flag scene? Wrong people.
I was going to say wrong people that don't matter.
Factual. Well, before we get that, we will do dinner at Camp Half-Blood, learn a little bit more, and that is where we will pick up next week. So I will see you then, Jack.
We'll see you then.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast and want to support our content, please be sure to leave a review, share with your friend, and follow us on all your favorite podcast platforms. Until next time, this has been Notes from the Oracle.